Before the first police light flashed against the iron gates of the Whitmore estate, Isaiah Brooks still believed the world might recognize the difference between a thief and a man trying to do the right thing. He stood in the rain with both hands wrapped around a brown leather handbag that looked too expensive to be anywhere near him. His coat soaked through, his shoes muddy from the long walk across town, and his breath coming out in thin white clouds beneath the yellow glow of the mansion's driveway lamps. Behind those gates rose a house made of glass, stone, and quiet money, the kind of place Isaiah had only seen from sidewalks while pushing a shopping cart full of cans, old copper wire, and broken things other people no longer wanted. But tonight, he had not come to beg. He had not come to ask for food, shelter, or even a ride back to the abandoned lot where he slept under a blue tarp beside the train tracks. He had come because inside that handbag was $80,000 in cash, tucked beside a checkbook, a set of house keys, and a faded family photograph, and every step he had taken through the storm had been a step away from the easiest temptation of his life. The woman on the other side of the gate did not know that. Eleanor Whitmore saw only a homeless black man standing in front of her property after dark, holding the bag she had been tearing her house apart trying to find. Her face turned pale, then hard. She was 61, wealthy, polished, and frightened in the way people become frightened when their perfect world is suddenly touched by someone they do not understand. Isaiah lifted the bag slightly, careful and slow, as if even the wrong movement might make him look guilty. "Ma'am," he said, voice rough from cold and years of being ignored, "I think this belongs to you." For 1 second, the rain seemed to hush around them. Then Eleanor stepped backward and shouted toward the house, "Call the police." The word struck harder than Isaiah expected, not because he had never been judged before. He had been judged in grocery store aisles, at bus stops, outside gas stations, and under bridges where people locked their car doors just for driving past him. But this was different. This time, he was holding proof that he was better than what the world assumed, and still the world was calling him a criminal. The front door opened, and a younger man in a dark sweater rushed out behind Eleanor, his eyes narrowing the instant he saw the bag. "That's him," he said quickly. "He stole it." Isaiah looked at the man, then at Eleanor, then down at the leather strap cutting into his wet fingers. "Sir, I found it at Harlan Salvage Yard," he said. "I walked 6 miles to bring it back." But by then, the first patrol car was already turning into the driveway, red and blue lights spreading across the rain like a warning. The officers did not rush at Isaiah, and no one shouted after that first terrible accusation, but the silence that followed felt almost worse. It was the kind of silence that gathered around a man when everyone had already decided what he was before asking a single question. Officer Ryan Miller stepped out of the patrol car first, one hand resting near his belt, his eyes moving from Isaiah's wet coat to the expensive handbag in his hands, then to Eleanor Whitmore, standing beneath the covered entry with her arms folded tightly across her chest. His partner, Officer Dana Clark, moved to the side, calm and watchful, while the rain tapped against the hood of the patrol car in steady little clicks. "Sir," Officer Miller said, "keep your hand where I can see them," and place the bag on the ground. Isaiah nodded slowly. He had learned over the years that sudden movements made frightened people more frightened. He bent with care, set the leather bag on the smooth stone driveway, and straightened again with his palms open. "I was trying to return it," he said. "I found it this morning." The younger man in the dark sweater stepped forward before Eleanor could speak. His name was Brandon Whitmore, though Isaiah did not know that yet. He carried himself like someone who had never had to prove he belonged anywhere. "That is what they all say," Brandon said, his voice sharp enough to cut through the rain. "My aunt's bag goes missing, and this man just happens to appear at her gate with it after dark." Isaiah looked at him for a long second, not angry, not even surprised, just tired in a way that made his shoulders seem heavier beneath the soaked fabric. "I came after dark because it took me all day to find the address," he said. "There was an envelope inside with this street on it. I did not have a car. I walked." Officer Clark glanced at Isaiah's shoes, caked with mud along the sides, the soles worn thin enough to bend with the stones beneath them. For a moment, her expression changed, not into belief, but into doubt, and sometimes doubt was the first doorway to fairness. Eleanor noticed it and looked away. She had spent the last hour in panic, searching through closets, drawers, and the back seat of her white Cadillac Escalade, trying to remember where she had put the money. $80,000 was not just cash. It was leverage, secrecy, and the last piece of a private matter she had not wanted her family to know about. Brandon had been the one who told her the bag must have been stolen. Brandon had been the one who insisted they call the police if anyone suspicious came near the property. Now he stood beside her, whispering that she should not get too close, that desperate people were capable of anything. Isaiah heard every word. He did not answer. He only watched the rainwater run down the edge of the handbag and drip onto the white stone like the slow ticking of a clock. Officer Miller crouched and opened the bag just enough to look inside. Stacks of bills sat wrapped in bank bands, untouched and orderly. The checkbook was still there. The keys were still there. The old photograph was still tucked into the side pocket. Nothing appeared missing. Officer Miller looked up at Isaiah again, and this time his voice was less certain. "You're telling me you found this at Harlan's salvage yard?" Isaiah nodded. Around 10 in the morning, maybe a little after, a black sport utility vehicle came through, dropped off some boxes and old furniture. The bag fell near a pile of scrap appliances. "I thought it was empty." Brandon laughed once under his breath, a small sound meant for Eleanor more than anyone else. A homeless man finds $80,000 and just decides to return it. That is convenient. Isaiah finally turned toward him. His eyes were calm, but something in them made Brandon stop smiling. Convenient would have been keeping it, Isaiah said. Returning it was the hard part. For the first time, Eleanor really looked at him. Not at the torn sleeve, not at the gray in his beard, not at the rain dripping from his brow, but the strange steadiness in his face. It unsettled her, because guilt usually fidgeted, begged, explained too much. Isaiah did none of those things. He stood there with empty hands, soaked to the bone, while the richest woman on Marigold Lane tried to decide whether honesty could wear a coat with holes in it. Then Officer Clark reached into the side pocket and pulled out the small leather notebook Isaiah had noticed hours earlier. The cover was old, soft at the corners, and embossed with initials Eleanor had not seen in 6 years. "C'est vous." Her breath caught. Brandon's face changed so quickly that Isaiah almost missed it. Almost. Officer Clark held it up and asked, "Ma'am, is this yours too?" Eleanor took one step forward, her voice suddenly smaller than before. "No," she said. "That belonged to my husband." For a moment, no one moved. The rain kept falling. The patrol lights kept washing the driveway in red and blue, but the small notebook in Officer Clark's hand seemed to pull every sound out of the night. Eleanor Whitmore stared at the initials on the worn leather cover as if she were looking at a ghost. Thomas Whitmore had been gone for 6 years, yet there was his handwriting pressed into the first page when Officer Clark opened it carefully beneath the porch light. Eleanor knew that handwriting before she read a single word. It had been on birthday cards, business contracts, grocery lists, and the short notes he used to leave beside her morning coffee. Brandon stepped forward too quickly. "Aunt Eleanor," he said, "that is private. We should take this inside." But Officer Miller lifted a hand, not harshly, only firmly enough to stop him. "This is part of an active complaint now, sir. We need to understand why it was in the bag." Isaiah watched Eleanor's face change. The suspicion did not disappear, but something older moved behind it. Something fragile and painful. She reached toward the notebook, then pulled her hand back as though touching it might open a door she had spent years trying to keep closed. "Where did you find that?" she asked Isaiah. "In the side pocket," he said. "I did not read it. I only saw the address on the envelope and the picture." "What picture?" Eleanor asked. Officer Clark reached into the bag again and removed the faded photograph. The edges were curled, the colors softened by time. It showed a younger Thomas Whitmore standing beside a tow truck on the shoulder of a highway, smiling with one arm around a black mechanic in a blue work shirt. Between them stood a little girl with wind-blown hair, holding a paper cup from a roadside diner. Eleanor covered her mouth. "That is Grace," she whispered. She was 9. Isaiah leaned forward before he could stop himself, his eyes fixed on the mechanic in the picture. The blue shirt, the patch above the pocket. "Brooks Auto Repair." His own younger face stared back at him from another lifetime, from before the gray beard, before the shelter lines, before the nights under the overpass and the mornings digging through metal scraps for enough money to buy coffee. He had not seen that photograph in more than 20 years. Officer Miller noticed. "You know this picture?" Isaiah swallowed. "I know the man in the uniform." Brandon's eyes darted toward him. Eleanor lowered her hand. "Who is he?" Isaiah looked at her, rainwater sliding down his temples. "That was me." The words landed quietly, but they changed the shape of everything. Eleanor looked from Isaiah to the photograph and back again, trying to place the weathered man before her inside the memory of the broad-shouldered mechanic beside her husband. She remembered that trip vaguely, a summer drive outside Macon, a delay on the interstate, Thomas coming home later than planned, and saying some stranger had saved him from being stranded in dangerous heat. But she had never known the man's name. Thomas had mentioned finding him again, thanking him properly, maybe offering help through the foundation. Then business had pulled them away, illness had arrived, and grief had swallowed the details. Isaiah's voice grew. Softer. "Your husband's car overheated on Interstate 75. It was 100 degrees that day. His granddaughter was crying because the air conditioning went out. I towed them to my shop, fixed the radiator hose, and did not charge him because he had left his wallet at a rest stop." Eleanor closed her eyes. "Thomas told me someone helped him." Isaiah nodded once. "He came back the next week to pay, but my shop had already closed for repairs after the fire next door damaged the building. I was moving everything out. I guess we missed each other." Brandon shifted beside Eleanor, his polished shoes darkening in the rain. "This is sentimental," he said, "but it does not prove he did not steal the bag." Officer Clark turned one page of the notebook, and her brow tightened. "Actually," she said, "it might prove something else." Eleanor looked at her. "What does it say?" Officer Clark hesitated, then read the first line aloud. "Find Isaiah Brooks. I owe that man more than money." The words seemed to hang between them longer than the rain itself. "Find Isaiah Brooks. I owe that man more than money." Eleanor repeated the sentence under her breath, and with every word, the man standing at her gate became less like a stranger and more like an unfinished chapter from her husband's life. Officer Clark kept the notebook angled beneath the porch light and turned another page. The handwriting grew smaller there, hurried in places, as if Thomas had written it during one of those long nights when illness had made sleep impossible. He wrote about the summer heat on Interstate 75, about his granddaughter Grace crying in the back seat, about a mechanic who stayed after closing, fixed the car, bought the child a cold lemonade from the vending machine, and refused payment with a smile that made Thomas ashamed of how quickly he had judged him. Isaiah looked down. He remembered the lemonade. He remembered Grace asking why his hands were so rough, and he remembered telling her that honest work left fingerprints even soap could not erase. Back then, his life had not been easy, but it had still been his. He had a small garage with 2 service bays, a wife named Denise who brought him dinner when he worked late, and a son, Caleb, who used to fall asleep on a stack of old tires while waiting for his father to close up shop. The world had not yet learned how much it could take from him. Eleanor listened as Officer Clark read another line. "If I do not find him before my time runs out, make sure he knows he mattered." The sentence broke something in her expression. Thomas had always carried regrets quietly. She used to think they were business regrets, missed deals, wrong investments, old arguments with men who cared more about winning than doing right. She had never imagined that one of those regrets had a name, a face, and rain dripping from a torn coat in her driveway. Brandon cleared his throat, forcing a smile that did not reach his eyes. "And Eleanor, this is touching, but we still need to be careful. People can learn names. People can make up stories." Isaiah did not look at Brandon. He kept his eyes on the photograph, seeing a younger version of himself standing beside a life that had since collapsed in pieces. First came the fire in the neighboring building, smoke damage, water damage, insurance delays. Then came Denise's diagnosis and the bills that arrived with cruel punctuality. Then came the lawsuit from a customer who claimed Isaiah had damaged an engine he had actually warned was unsafe to drive. The claim was false, but false things can still be expensive when the person telling them has money and the person defending himself does not. The garage closed. Denise passed away in a hospital room that smelled of antiseptic and old flowers. Caleb went to live with relatives in Birmingham, while Isaiah tried to get steady work again. Months became years. Phone numbers changed. Pride turned into distance. Distance turned into silence. By the time Isaiah realized he needed help, the world had already filed him under invisible. Officer Miller studied him with a quieter face now. "Mr. Brooks, why did you not go to the police station with the bag?" Isaiah gave a small, tired smile. "Because when a man who looks like me walks into a station with $80,000 and says he found it in the trash, the first question is not usually how can we help?" No one answered, because no one could honestly say he was wrong. Eleanor lowered her eyes. For the first time that night, shame reached her before fear could stop it. She saw his open hands. She saw the mud on his shoes. She saw that the money was still wrapped, the keys untouched, the checkbook unopened. And then she looked at Brandon, who had gone very still. Officer Clark noticed it too. "Sir," she said to Brandon, "you mentioned earlier that the bag was stolen from inside the house." Brandon blinked. "Yes, because that was the only explanation." Officer Clark held up the notebook. "Then why would a personal item belonging to Mr. Whitmore, something your aunt did not even know was in the bag, end up at a salvage yard with the cash?" Brandon's jaw tightened. "I have no idea. But Isaiah did. Not fully, not yet, but he remembered something from that morning. The black sport utility vehicle, the quick drop-off, the man in a dark sweater standing near the back, looking over his shoulder before tossing the last box onto the pile. Isaiah slowly raised his eyes to Brandon. "You were there," he said, "at Harlan's salvage yard. This morning." Brandon's eyes narrowed, but only for a fraction of a second. Then he gave a short laugh, the kind people use when they want a room to believe something is impossible before anyone has time to think. "That is ridiculous," he said. "I was in meetings all morning." Isaiah did not argue. He had spent too many years learning that the truth did not become stronger just because a man raised his voice around it. He simply looked at Brandon's dark sweater, at the expensive watch on his wrist, at the polished shoes now wet from the rain, and remembered the same shape moving quickly beside a black Cadillac Escalade at Harlan Salvage Yard. The man had worn a baseball cap then, pulled low over his forehead, but Isaiah remembered details other people missed. People who live outside notice everything. They notice which store throws away bread after 9 at night, which parking lot security guard looks the other way, which clouds means sleeping under a bridge instead of a tarp, and which rich man throws away a bag too carefully for it to be in. Accident. Officer Miller turned toward Brandon. "Sir, where exactly were you this morning between 9 and 11? Brandon's smile thinned. "I do not appreciate being questioned based on the word of a man who is digging through garbage." Officer Clark's expression cooled. "He returned $80,000, sir. That earns him at least a question being heard." Eleanor looked from Brandon to Isaiah, and something inside her shifted again. All evening, Brandon had sounded certain. Too certain. He had been the first to say the bag was stolen, the first to tell her not to check the car again, the first to suggest that someone desperate must have taken it. At the time, she had mistaken his urgency for concern. Now it felt like pressure. Brandon turned to her quickly. "Aunt Eleanor, you cannot seriously be listening to this." She did not answer. Her gaze had fallen back to the bag, the cash, the notebook, Thomas's initials. A memory surfaced, small but sharp. Brandon standing in her study that morning while she searched for the old leather notebook Thomas had kept during his illness. He had told her she was tired, that she probably misplaced things more often than she realized, that maybe it was time to let him manage more of the estate paperwork. Eleanor had hated the suggestion, but she had also been frightened by how forgetful grief and age had made her feel. That was exactly where Brandon wanted her, frightened enough to doubt herself. Officer Miller spoke into his radio and requested a unit to check with Harlan Salvage Yard about security footage from that morning. Brandon's face hardened. "You need a warrant for that." Officer Miller looked at him carefully. "We need to ask. People are allowed to answer." Isaiah stood quietly as the rain softened to a mist. He could have walked away then. He had returned the money. He had said what he saw. The rest belonged to the kind of people who had lawyers, gates, and rooms warm enough to forget the weather. But the notebook changed that. Thomas Whitmore had remembered him when almost everyone else had forgotten. That meant something. Eleanor took one step down from the porch, closer to the rain, closer to Isaiah. "Mr. Brooks," she said, and it was the first time she had used his name. "Why were you at the salvage yard this morning?" Isaiah's eyes lowered for a moment. "Work mostly. Not official work. I collect scrap. Some days Derek Harlan lets me sort metal if I stay out of the way. Some days he tells me to leave. I was looking for copper wire behind the appliance pile when the black sport utility vehicle came in. Officer Clark asked, 'Did you see who was driving?' Isaiah nodded slowly. A woman was driving. Older. Gray hair. She looked upset. Eleanor's lips parted. 'That was me,' Isaiah continued. But she did not throw the last boxes. He did. His eyes moved to Brandon. 'After you drove off, he stayed behind.' He pulled another box from the back, looked around, and pushed it deep into the junk pile. The bag fell out when the box split open. Brandon's voice rose, clean and polished, but shaking at the edges. 'That is a lie.' Eleanor looked at him, then really looked, and for the first time all night, Brandon seemed less like family and more like a locked door. A phone rang from Officer Miller's patrol car. He stepped away, listened, then turned back with a different look on his face. "Harlan's yard has cameras at the front gate and scale office," he said. "The owner says the footage is still there." Brandon went pale beneath the porch light. Isaiah saw it. Eleanor saw it too. And in that quiet second before anyone spoke, the whole story began to turn. Officer Miller did not say what the footage showed over the radio, but the way his hand tightened around the phone told everyone enough. Brandon saw it too, and for the first time since Isaiah had arrived at the gate, he stopped performing confidence. His shoulders drew back, his mouth opened slightly, then closed again, as if every explanation he had prepared was suddenly arriving too late. Eleanor stood beneath the edge of the porch with rain misting across her silver hair, watching the young man she had trusted with passwords, property files, and family keys become a stranger in front of her. Officer Clark placed the notebook back inside a clear evidence sleeve from the patrol car, careful with it, almost respectful, while the leather bag remained on the driveway between two worlds, the mansion above it and Isaiah's worn shoes beside it. "Mr. Whitmore," Officer Miller said, "the yard owner confirms a black Cadillac Escalade entered at 9:58 this morning. It left at 10:11. A second person remained near the disposal area for several minutes after the driver walked into the office." Brandon swallowed. "That does not mean anything. I help my aunt with errands all the time." Eleanor's voice came out quiet. "You told me you were in meetings." He turned to her quickly. "I was trying not to confuse things. You have been under stress." The words were soft, but something about them made Eleanor flinch. Isaiah recognized that tone. It was the sound of someone wrapping control in concern. He had heard versions of it from landlords, clerks, collection agents, and people who smiled while explaining why he did not qualify for one more chance. Eleanor heard it differently now, too. For months, Brandon had been telling her she misplaced documents, forgot conversations, signed things twice, asked questions already answered. Each comment had seemed small on its own. Together, they formed a cage she had not realized was being built around her. Officer Clark looked at Brandon. "The owner is sending the footage to the department. Until we review it, no one is being accused of anything beyond what we can verify. But I need everyone to understand that making a false report is serious." Brandon's face reddened, then cooled again as he forced himself still. Isaiah felt the night shift around them. A few minutes earlier, he had been the man everyone doubted. Now the doubt had moved, not loudly, not dramatically, but with the slow certainty of a door closing somewhere unseen. Eleanor stepped closer to the bag and looked at the money as if it no longer mattered the way it had an hour ago. $80,000 had frightened her. The notebook frightened her more, because money could be replaced. The truth that someone in her own family had tried to make her question her mind could not be put back where it came from. She turned toward Isaiah. "Why did you really bring it back?" Isaiah looked at the mansion, then at the wet street beyond the gate, where the world he knew waited in darkness. "Because it was not mine," he said. Eleanor waited, sensing there was more. Isaiah breathed out slowly. "And because my wife used to tell me that a man can lose his house, his job, even the people who know his name. But if he gives away his honesty, he has helped the world bury him. Denise said that? Eleanor asked, remembering the name from Thomas's notebook, though she had not realized she had spoken it aloud. Isaiah's eyes lifted. You read her name? Officer Clark glanced at the page through the sleeve. Thomas wrote that you had a wife named Denise and a little boy named Caleb. Isaiah went still. The rain, the lights, the mansion, even Brandon seemed to fade from his face. Caleb's name had not been spoken to him by a stranger in years. He had searched when he could, called old numbers, written letters that came back marked undeliverable, asked relatives who either did not know or did not want to say. Poverty did not only take comfort. It took records, addresses, working phones, the tiny threads that kept a family tied together. Eleanor saw the pain cross his face and understood that the money had never been the most valuable thing in the bag. Thomas's notebook held a piece of Isaiah's lost life. Officer Miller's phone buzzed again. He opened the message, watched the short clip, and then looked directly at Brandon. The footage shows you placing the box in the disposal pile after Mrs. Whitmore walked away. It also shows the bag falling out. Brandon said nothing. Officer Miller continued, and it shows Mr. Brooks picking it up, opening it, then stopping two other men from walking off with it before leaving the yard alone. Eleanor covered her mouth, but this time it was not fear. It was shame, sharp and unmistakable. Isaiah had not merely returned the bag. He had protected it when no one was watching. Brandon stepped back half a pace. And Eleanor, I can explain. Eleanor lowered her hand, her voice steady now in a way it had not been all night. No, Brandon. For once I think I can. Eleanor's words did not rise above the rain, but they carried through the driveway with the weight of a door, being locked from the inside. Brandon stared at her as though he did not recognize the woman standing before him. And maybe he did not, because the Eleanor Whitmore he had been shaping for months was supposed to be uncertain, dependent, and grateful for his guidance. This Eleanor looked wounded, but she was no longer confused. Officer Miller asked Brandon to step toward the patrol car while they sorted out the report, and Brandon obeyed with stiff movements, still insisting that everything had been misunderstood, that he had only been trying to protect his aunt from embarrassment, that the box had been discarded by mistake. But every sentence sounded smaller than the one before it. Isaiah watched without satisfaction. He had no taste for seeing a family break open in a driveway. He knew too well that pain did not become sweet just because someone else deserved it. Eleanor turned away from Brandon and faced him fully. The porch lights showed the lines around her eyes, the careful makeup softened by rain, the expression of a woman who had spent too long trusting the wrong voice. Mr. Brooks, she said, I owe you an apology. Isaiah nodded once, but did not make it easy for her by pretending it had not hurt. Yes, ma'am, he said softly. You do. The honesty of it made Officer Clark look down, and Eleanor's face tightened with shame. I saw the bag in your hands, Eleanor said, and I decided who you were before you spoke. Isaiah looked toward the gate, where two neighbors stood under umbrellas near the sidewalk, phones lowered now that the scene no longer fit the story they thought they were recording. Happens every day, he said, just usually not in front of a house this big. Eleanor absorbed that quietly. Then she did something no one expected. She stepped off the dry edge of the porch and into the rain, crossing the short distance until she stood only a few feet from him. Her expensive shoes sank slightly into the wet edge of the lawn. I cannot undo what I said, she told him, but I can start by saying it where everyone can hear me. She turned toward the officers, the neighbors, and Brandon waiting beside the patrol car. This man did not steal from me. He protected what belonged to me when no one was watching, and I accused him because I was afraid and because I was wrong. Isaiah's throat tightened, not from forgiveness, not yet, but from the strange force of hearing a wealthy woman tell the truth about him out loud. For years, people had apologized to him in private if they apologized at all, slipping regret into quiet corners where it could not cost them anything. Eleanor's apology stood in the open, under porch lights and police lights and the eyes of people who had already judged him. Officer Miller closed the bag and handed Eleanor a receipt for the evidence record before returning the cash to her custody after confirming the report would be amended. She looked at the money, then at Isaiah. "I want to give you a reward," she said. Isaiah shook his head before she finished. "I did not bring it back for that." "I know," Eleanor said. "That is why I am offering it." He almost smiled, but it faded quickly. "Money helps, ma'am, but money does not know where my son is." The words slipped out before he could stop them, and once they were there, the night changed again. Eleanor looked at the notebook in Officer Clark's hand. Thomas knew about Caleb. He wrote the name down. Officer Clark carefully opened to the next page and scanned the lines. "There is a note here," she said. "Birmingham, Alabama. Sister-in-law named Ruth. Possible church connection." Isaiah stopped breathing for a second. Ruth had been Denise's older sister. He had written to an old address years ago and never heard back. Eleanor saw hope appear on his face like something painful returning to life. She turned to Officer Clark. "Can that help find him?" Officer Clark nodded slowly. "It is not official police business unless someone is missing under suspicious circumstances, but there are legal ways to search records, public directories, church contacts, and family filings." Eleanor looked back at Isaiah. "Then we will use every legal way there is." Brandon called from beside the patrol car. "And Eleanor, you are making a mistake." Eleanor did not look at him. "No," she said. "I am correcting one." And for the first time that night, Isaiah Brooks lowered his hands, not because the world had become safe, but because one person in it had finally decided to see him clearly. By the time Officer Miller drove away with Brandon in the back seat for further questioning, the rain had slowed to a silver mist over Marigold Lane, and the Whitmore estate looked less like a mansion than a place where a long-hidden truth had finally turned on the lights. Eleanor stood in the driveway with Thomas's notebook held against her chest, her face pale but steady, while Isaiah remained near the gate, unsure whether he was allowed to leave, stay, or believe that anything promised in a moment like this could survive until morning. Officer Clark stayed behind long enough to make sure the amended report was clear. Mr. Brooks returned the property voluntarily. No evidence of theft. No charges. She said the words plainly, but to Isaiah, they sounded almost unreal. No charges meant he could walk away. No charges meant tomorrow the world would still be hard. But tonight it had failed to put another stain on his name. Eleanor asked him to come inside to dry off, and at first he refused. Not sharply, not proudly, but with the careful caution of a man who had learned that warm rooms could turn cold quickly when people remembered who they had invited in. Eleanor did not push. She only sent Grace, her granddaughter, to bring out a clean towel, a wool blanket, and a cup of coffee in a white ceramic mug that warmed Isaiah's hands before he even drank from it. Grace was no longer the little girl from the photograph. She was in her early 30s now, with Thomas's kind eyes and Eleanor's direct way of standing. She looked at the picture, then at Isaiah, and her voice softened. "I remember the lemonade," she said. Isaiah looked up. "You do?" Grace nodded. "I remember being scared, and I remember you telling me cars were like people, that most of them could keep going if someone listened before they broke down." For the first time all night, Isaiah smiled. It was small, tired, and gone almost as soon as it appeared, but Eleanor saw it, and the sight cut deeper than any accusation she had made. A man who had once comforted her granddaughter had spent years being treated like a problem to move along. Inside the house, Eleanor's attorney was called. Then a private investigator recommended by Officer Clark's department contact was called. Then an old church in Birmingham was found through a yellowed note in Thomas's handwriting. Ruth Brooks had attended there years earlier. She had moved twice since then, but the church secretary remembered the family because Caleb had sung in the youth choir before leaving for technical school. Technical school. The words hit Isaiah like sunlight after a long winter. Caleb had made it that far. Caleb had kept going. Eleanor watched Isaiah grip the mug with both hands while Grace wrote down every lead. There was no dramatic promise, no easy miracle. Only phone calls, names, addresses, and the slow rebuilding of a path that poverty had erased piece by piece. Near dawn, one number finally connected to a repair shop outside Montgomery, Alabama. The man who answered was named Caleb Brooks. He was 30 years old. His voice was cautious at first, then silent when Grace explained who was calling and why. Isaiah could not speak when the phone was handed to him. He only listened to the faint breathing on the other end until a voice he had last heard as a boy said, "Dad?" Isaiah closed his eyes, and the coffee mug trembled in his hands. "Yes, son," he whispered. "It is me. I am still here." Caleb arrived 2 days later in a silver pickup with Alabama plates and a dent above the rear wheel, pulling into the Whitmore driveway just after sunrise while the grass still glittered with dew. Isaiah stood outside the restored carriage house wearing clean jeans, a navy work shirt Grace had found for him, and the same old cap he had worn through years of weather, hunger, and being looked through by strangers. He had faced the police lights without shaking, returned a fortune without asking for reward, and listened to a wealthy woman apologize in front of the neighborhood. But when his son stepped out of that truck, Isaiah looked suddenly afraid. Caleb was taller than he remembered, broad in the shoulders, with Denise's eyes and a mechanic's hands. For a long moment, neither man moved. There were too many years between them for a simple hug to solve everything. Too many missed birthdays, unanswered letters, changed numbers, and nights when each had believed the other chose silence. Then Caleb crossed the driveway first. He did not run. He walked slowly, as if approaching a memory that might disappear if startled. Isaiah removed his cap and held it against his chest. "I tried to find you," he said, his voice breaking on the smallest words. Caleb nodded, and his own voice was thick when he answered. "I know that now." Grace had sent him copies of Thomas's notebook, old addresses, returned envelopes, and the names Isaiah had followed until the trail went cold. Poverty had made him look absent, but the record showed a father searching through every door he could still reach. Caleb stopped in front of him. "Mama always said you were stubborn enough to outlast a storm." Isaiah let out a sound that was almost a laugh and almost a sob. She was right about most things. Then Caleb opened his arms, and Isaiah stepped into them like a man finally allowed to set down a weight he had carried for half his life. Eleanor watched from the porch with Thomas's notebook in her hands, tears shining but quiet. She had offered Isaiah the $80,000 as a reward, but he had taken only enough to replace his identification, buy clothes, secure a small apartment, and begin again without owing anyone his dignity. The rest, at his request, became the first deposit in the Brooks Second Chance Garage Fund, a program Eleanor created to train homeless men and women in basic auto repair, towing dispatch, and shop maintenance. The old carriage house behind the estate became its first workshop. On the wall near the entrance, Grace hung the faded photograph of Thomas, young Grace, and Isaiah beside the tow truck, and beneath it a simple line from Thomas's notebook: "Make sure he knows he mattered." Brandon's case moved through the courts without Eleanor shielding him from consequences. She did not speak of revenge. She spoke only of truth, boundaries, and the cost of letting fear choose your eyes. Weeks later, when the first group of trainees arrived, Isaiah stood at the garage door in a clean work shirt with his name stitched over the pocket. Caleb stood beside him, hired as the lead instructor from Montgomery, pretending not to notice when his father glanced at him every few seconds just to make sure he was real. A young trainee asked Isaiah why he had returned the money when it could have solved everything. Isaiah looked across the shop at the open toolboxes, the morning light on the concrete floor, Eleanor and Grace speaking with a church volunteer near the office, and Caleb tightening a bolt on an old Ford pickup. Then he smiled softly. "Because money can change where a man sleeps," he said,